Okay, so as we get started today, before I actually get into the AutoCAD and Illustrator collaging, I'm going to pass out your grade sheets. I'm sorry, I'm behind again, of course, but they're current as of this morning, which is good. I'm not really worried about all of you that are here because you're here. I'm worried about the people that aren't here. But this week is the last week to withdraw from the class. So if you're not doing well and you feel like you don't want to keep going, this is the time to withdraw. Like I said, those of you that are here are not the people I'm worried about. So, but I have to at least warn you guys that this is kind of the opt-out time should you want to opt out. Not that I philosophically agree with that, but when you move on to Berkeley or Cal Poly or whatever, if you move on, nobody's going to tell you that it's time to withdraw. They're just going to fail you. So that's just the way it works. And so I think we do, at this level, we do a little too much hand-holding in the process. So I'm hand-holding right now and reminding you. But like I said, all of you are here, and so I'm not worried about you people. I'm worried about the people that aren't here. So anyway, you'll get your grade sheets back after we do it. The other thing about it that I will make a note on the grade sheet is some of you completed exercise 124, which was the one that you were supposed to do when I was sick. That shows up if you did it and posted it on here. Many of you probably did it and just didn't post it. That's no big deal. We'll catch up to it, and you'll get credit for it when it happens. For those of you that did it, it will give you a little bit of extra credit in your exercise column right now. That'll even out once we catch up. So I didn't take it into account. So some of you might have like 105% on your exercises column. 124. We did 124 ahead. So anyway, that's my mistake for having the numbers messed up. But we'll solve that as it goes forward. I just like to at least tell you that happened. Yeah. So about that exercise? Yes. We're not going to be doing that in class. We won't do it in class. Right. So you will need to do it on your own. So that's the difference. And so, but there isn't like a specific due date. So those of you that already did it, you got credit for it. If you haven't done it yet, just do it. It's a SketchUp exercise. It's an easy introductory SketchUp exercise. So I'm not worried. That's why I gave it to you, because it didn't involve a lot of hand-holding. So we will do lots more SketchUp. So it's not like you missed anything out of it. That day, you mostly, everybody shows me that they already know everything about SketchUp. When I first started teaching SketchUp, this is a total side note. When I first started teaching SketchUp, nobody had ever worked in SketchUp before. And I would ask people, has anybody ever opened SketchUp before? And nobody's hands would raise. Now, if I ask the question right now, I'll ask it, how many people have worked in SketchUp before? Pretty much everybody's hand goes up. So I don't worry about it too much. But if you've never worked in SketchUp before, I'll walk you through it. It's really easy to pick up. So, okay, so back into the world of AutoCAD and ultimately today into Illustrator. Today is our first of many crossover exercises. So we will do some SketchUp coming up. But with every SketchUp thing that we do, we're going to end up doing some collage work in Photoshop, or we're going to bring it back into another program. So today really marks a turning point for us, because this is when we start to use the programs together rather than separately. Thus far, it's always been like, okay, we'll work in Illustrator for a while, and then we'll work in InDesign for a while. Now it's really about how do we pile these together and use them for their best purposes. And so for exercise 122, we're going to combine working in AutoCAD with working in Adobe Illustrator. And I'm going to show you where some of them have advantages over the other, and why you might choose to use Illustrator to do some of the work rather than just doing everything in AutoCAD. That's not to say that every office or every practice or every time that you do an AutoCAD drawing, you bring it into Illustrator. It's not always appropriate. But generally speaking, for design drawings that are going to be hung up on a wall for a presentation, that are going to be given to a client to look at, that's where Illustrator can be a good, powerful tool to use. If you're doing, let's say construction drawings or working drawings or something like that, Illustrator is not really appropriate, because it's more about the technical, this is how you build the project. And it doesn't matter how pretty the drawings are, because it's about how do you build the project, versus trying to sell the design idea to a client or to a design review panel or to a competition or something like that. So That's where Illustrator really starts to shine. And I'll show you as we go through today why it's a valuable tool. So I opened up my file from last class. This was the layout that I created in the last class. You can, of course, make edits to this. You can change it as we go forward. Sometimes edits are easy to wrap back into your Illustrator file. Sometimes they're harder to wrap back in. It depends on how much work you've done in Illustrator. So in an ideal world, you'd finish the AutoCAD drawing, you'd be happy with the AutoCAD drawing, and you'd move over into the Illustrator work, and you'd never go back to AutoCAD. That's an ideal world. In the real world, you end up doing a few back and forths. And so we'll talk through that, and maybe I'll give you an example of where something like that might happen as we go forward. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this AutoCAD drawing and I'm going to make a PDF out of it. So we did that last class, so you got a preview, a precursor to that, but I'm going to go ahead and do it again as part of this process. So I'll go ahead and just go up to the print or plot icon. This batch plotting thing, I know you guys have seen this come up very frequently, and we've always continued to plot a single sheet. If I had a full sheet set, a big document set that's in AutoCAD, batch plotting would allow me to print multiple sheets at the same time, and it can be useful. For your purposes in school, you're never going to use batch plotting. You just don't have the quantity of drawings necessary. This is something that you'd use, let's say you had 30 or 40 sheets in a big roll of construction drawings. That's where batch plotting can matter. For something like this, it's just not worth it. So we can continue to plot a single sheet. You can check the box for do not show me this again before you continue to plot a single sheet if you want. But these computers are frozen, so you'll have to pick it next time. But at least for the rest of the day, you won't have to pick it anymore. So we'll continue to plot a single sheet. All of the options here are just fine. We've already preset them. I'll go ahead and say OK. And now it's a matter of saving this onto my OneDrive or onto your flash drive. Let me go into today's folder. All right, there we go, and I'll go ahead and save it. So it plots my sheet, and it gives me an Adobe Acrobat preview of my sheet with a few warning issues. And I can look at my sheet and I can say, OK, that looks reasonable. I'm ready to move on. Remember, when you're looking at it in Acrobat, sometimes you have to actually zoom in until you're at 100% to see the line weights. Acrobat doesn't always display everything correctly. I'm going to go ahead and close Acrobat. That was just a preview. I'll minimize AutoCAD, and I'm going to open up Adobe Illustrator. I already had it opened up so that I didn't have to wait for it to open while you guys were lecturing, but you guys can open it as well. I'll go into the File menu, and I'll choose just Open. And one of the great things about PDFs is that they open natively in Illustrator. You can work on them, and then you can save them, and they still are PDFs. So previously, when you did your Charlie Harper, we ended up saving an Adobe Illustrator file, a .ai. From here, we're going to be working on a PDF. We're going to edit that PDF, and it's going to stay a PDF. So it never will actually be turned into an Adobe Illustrator file. It's going to stay that PDF. So I'm going to go ahead and go find that file that I just saved. And that was not what I wanted. Here we go. And I'll go ahead and I'll open that up. I'll press Control-0 so that I can see everything on the page. And this gives me a little bit better sense of line weights than the Adobe Acrobat did. And so now I can start to kind of analyze, what did AutoCAD give me? What did it create in the first place? If I come over to my layer stack right here and I click on my layers, you see that I get one layer. So it doesn't preserve the layers in AutoCAD, which is unfortunate. But inside that one layer, there's 5 clip groups. Each of these clip groups represents one of the viewports that I created. So if I were to turn them off, for example, you could see that each time I turn one off, this clip group is the floor plan. This clip group is my elevation. This clip group is the next elevation. So they're already separate into each drawing set, which is a good thing. So we already have those separated out. At this point, though, these clip groups, I need to break them up so that I actually have lines instead of the clip groups, which is something that is basically the viewport. And to do that, I'm going to select the layer here. I'll go to the little flyout menu, and I'm going to say Release Clipping Mask. And you're going to have to do this for all of the layers. And you'll see that it changes from being a clip group to just a group. Nothing physically changes on the screen. It's just how Illustrator sees it. So I'll select the next layer. I'll go to the flyout menu, the 4 lines with the downward facing arrow, and I'll choose Release Clipping Mask. And I'm going to do that for each one of these layers. So this next clip group, downward arrow, Release Clipping Mask. Next clip group, downward arrow, Release Clipping Mask. Next group, downward arrow, Release Clipping Mask. There we go. So now all of these have been released from their clipping masks. And because they're released, I can now come in and I could select any one of these groups. And when I click on the object, they're still grouped together as groups. They're not individual objects yet. I could take my group and I could ungroup that object. So if I right-click on it and I say Ungroup, for example, it would then be completely ungrouped such that I could pick any one of the individual objects. I tend, however, to leave them in their groups because in that mode, simply double-clicking on the group gets you into what's called group isolation mode, where we're inside a layer and then inside a group, and all we're working on is this one group. If I go to try to click the other pieces, they get grayed out and kind of locked. So it lets us isolate just this one group. So I tend to keep them as groups. That's a personal preference. Sometimes you do have to actually break them apart, but for the most part, we can leave them inside their group. So I'm going to go ahead and click this little backward-facing arrow to back myself out of group isolation mode so that I can see all 5 of the groups again. So now I have all 5 of the groups available for me. Before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of this main layer so that I can work on the duplicate, just in case I mess something up. Always a good idea. So I'm going to come over to the layer stack. We have layer 1. I could rename layer 1. I could just call it AutoCAD. For example, AutoCAD drawing. And I could go to the little flyout menu and I could say duplicate AutoCAD drawing. There it is. Now I have an AutoCAD drawing copy and I have the original. I'm going to turn off the original and I'm going to work on the copy. It would probably be good for the copy to be below the original, just for good practice. So there's the copy. I'm going to work on the copy. The first thing that I'm going to play with, and this is something that we talked about and I did earlier in the semester, but I'm going to remind you of it again, is I'm going to create a live paint of these objects such that I could fill in, say, the ground or the walls or something like that. So first thing that I'll do is with the AutoCAD drawing layer off with only one on, so this is my copy, I'm going to select everything. So I'll press Control-A to select all, or I could draw a box around everything so that I select it all. And I'm going to go up to Object, and then Live Paint, and I'm going to Make. And my selection changes to have little stars in the corners of my selection group. This is now a Live Paint group. If I come over to the Live Paint Bucket tool, which is underneath the Shape Builder tool, it's right here. You can also press K on the keyboard to get there. This Live Paint Bucket will allow me to fill in certain regions. So I'm going to pick a bright color. And I wanted to have no fill, but we'll have to adjust that later. And when I move over my object, I can now start to fill in the various regions. And this is something that you saw happen before. Let me do Control+ to zoom in a bit, and we can look at my floor plan here. And I could start filling in where all these walls are. Now, your good logical question here would be to say, well, wait a minute, you did this in AutoCAD already using the hatch tool. And you're right, I did do it in AutoCAD using the hatch tool, and that's a perfectly viable option for doing this. The difference here is that I can apply a texture to it as if I were coloring it with a set of markers versus just a black or a gray. And so this may be an option for you. You may also decide that this isn't worth the time and you'd rather just do it in AutoCAD. That's OK. One of the other things that you'll find today as I go through these various options, and I'm continuing to fill this in as I talk, is that I'll show you a bunch of different things, but it doesn't mean that all of them should be done to any given drawing. These are different strategies that may or may not end up looking good on a particular drawing. So I filled in all the walls with that kind of red color, pinky red color. I'm going to switch colors, and I'm going to switch over into like a, I don't know, we'll pick a blue color, and I'm going to fill in the floors. And I'm choosing to change the colors on purpose because it's going to make these selections a little bit easier down the road because I can select by color range. So I'm filling in the floors. Some of you, when you were doing the hatches, ended up having trouble with the hatches and they weren't filling in correctly, remember? And it was like filling in some of the objects or whatever. There's a pretty good chance if you do the live paint that it won't happen. That problem won't happen. So that can be an advantage to the live paint as well. Let me change my color again. And I'm going to fill in that outside area. All right, that looks pretty good. I will come back and I will work on one of the elevation views. So I'm going to work on just the plan view for right now. When I'm done with all of that, I'm going to click the expand button at the top of the tool ribbon here. And when I do that, the live paint then becomes a series of individual colored regions. So I could now take my direct select tool, the white arrow, and I could select just this pink shape here. When I select that pink shape, I could then move on and I could go to select, same, fill color, and I could get all of those pink regions selected at once. I'm going to come back over into my layer stack, and I'm going to create a new layer called, right now it's layer 3. I'm going to rename it for fills. And then on that fills layer, or maybe I'll rename it for walls, wall fill. Do that. I'm going to move all those objects that I selected onto that wall fill layer. I do that by selecting the objects and then dragging this box in the layer menu to the new layer. Now all of those are on the wall fill layer. So if I turned off the AutoCAD layer, I'd have just a layer with those shapes on it. I can do the same thing with the other shapes. I'll select the floors. I'll create a new layer. We'll call this one floor fill. I'll select the first one. I'll go to the select menu and say select same fill color. I'll get all of the blue. And I'll change that to be on the floor fill layer. There we go. The last piece is this green piece. This was the outside floor fill. So we'll call this, I don't know, deck fill. And I'll move that object onto the deck fill layer. There it is. So if I were to turn everything off, I could turn on these colored regions again, and I could apply a swatch or a texture to those colored regions. So as part of the illustrations today, I have some swatches that are available to you, and I told you guys earlier in the semester that I'd come back to this. These are swatches that I made that are based on the Prismacolor markers. And some of you have been trained in drawing with markers. Some of you have never been, doing actual drawing. The Prismacolor markers were something I really liked to draw with. When I was in school, I used to use them a lot. I think they're a great combination to computer drawings. If you print out computer drawings and then you color them in afterwards, you can get a really good look out of how you color and what you do. To be able to mimic that on the computer, however, I created a set of swatches that are based on the colors of the markers. So they match up with the colors of the markers. Some of them have a textured pattern as if you were using the marker, so they're not perfectly solid fills. They have little streaks in them. That was part of the design. So they're available to you if you go to your resources page. If you go to Swatches, they will show up here. Also, if you go to Resources and then Downloadable Resource Packages, there's a link for Download Prismacolor Swatches for Illustrator. That will take you to this page where you can download the various color sets. These are designations that Prismacolor, the company, made. They had an architectural set for a while. They don't sell it anymore, but these were the colors that were in the architectural set. They have a landscape set, but those colors aren't really there anymore because they mix up the sets in terms of what they sell. There's a warm gray set, a French gray set, and a cool gray set. There's a portrait color set that's currently available for sale. And so each of these match up. Not all of them have the streaks to them, but all of them do have the colors. So I'm going to go ahead and, for illustration purposes today, I'll probably use the warm gray, and I may use some of the architectural ones. I have these already downloaded on my flash drive, so I'm not going to re-download them in front of you, but they're here. If you want them, you can log in and get them. So at this point, I'm back to Illustrator, and I want to load in those swatches for me to be able to use. I'll open up the swatch menu, which is right here. I'm going to click on the downward arrow with the 4 lines, my flyout menu here, and I'm going to go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library. And I'll go to my flash drive, or in this case my OneDrive, where I have those swatches stored. So I'll come in here and I'll go to Swatches, and then they're available here under the PMs. And I'm going to load up the architectural and the warm gray. So I'll double click on architectural, and when these come up, I'm going to choose the Illustrator file, not the Swatch Exchange file. The Illustrator file has the streaks, so I'll pick that one. And I'll go ahead and say Open. And there they are. That's the architectural fill set. I'll go back to my flyout menu, and I'll go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library. Again, back to my OneDrive, into my resources. And I'm going to load up the warm grays. I really liked the warm grays when I was in school. I actually wore out some of my warm grays because I liked them so much. So the warm grays are slightly brown. They have a little bit of brown or yellow in them, and so I liked them. The cool grays, as much as like if I were painting my house or something, I would go more on the cool gray side where I'd have blues in it. Somehow in the drawings, the cool grays just never showed up as nice. So the warm gray, the actual physical markers were really good at kind of collage work. So at this point, I could select all of these pink lines, and I could do that by selecting one of them and then going to the Select menu and say Select Same Fill Color, and I'd get all of them. The other option is I can come to the layer. I could follow the wall fill line over, and there isn't that little box that represents the pieces yet, but if I click there, it would select everything on the layer. So that's how you would select everything on the layer in Adobe Illustrator. So it's selected, and I'd come down to one or the other of my swatch sets. I'm going to do the warm grays, and I'm going to pick, let's say, this is an 80% warm gray, and I could fill that in. It's probably hard for you guys to see the actual streaks on the projector. Let me do this for one of the larger regions. Let me turn on the floor. Let me select the floor there, and I'm going to turn it on in black to see if you guys can see it. No, you can't see it. Is there anything that I can do to make you see it? I can see it on mine. Let me try one of the, you see that? No, none of these show. They all just look like solid colors. Well, you're going to have to trust me. When you do it and you load it, you'll be able to see that it'll change. Anyway, I'm going to pick here. I did the 80% gray for the walls. I'm going to do maybe a 40% gray for the floors. And the outside deck fill here, I'm going to, we'll go a little bit lighter still. We'll go a 30% gray. So I have a 30, I have a 40, and I have an 80. If I were to turn those color regions on, there we go, we'd have kind of the plan, but I lost all of my lines in the process. So that's where it's always the advantage of keeping your regular AutoCAD drawing available. You turn it on, it's on top of everything else, and your line drawings will show back up. So if I were to zoom out here, I've created a really nice, subtle architectural floor plan that has a little bit of texture. It's so hard on the projector versus what it shows on the screen here. It has some subtle coloring to it. It's not overwhelming, but it gives a little bit more texture as part of the drawing. So it's small, subtle enhancements to the drawing. We could do the same thing in an elevation view with just a little bit of marker color. If you don't like being in the gray set, you could work in one of the other sets. This one has some more browns and different tones in it. But the other option that we have is we could actually collage in real textures. And I'm going to show you how to do this, but it's not necessarily something that everybody will do. So like I said, today is a lot about throwing different things at you. And you'll see which looks good and that sort of thing. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to come back. I'm going to turn off my AutoCAD drawing. I'm going to turn off my wall fill, my floor fill, and my deck fill. I'm going to turn on my original AutoCAD drawing here. And it looks like in the process, I managed to get rid of all my lines. And I'm not exactly sure how I did that. I thought I would have kept them. So I'm going to come back to my original AutoCAD drawing. I'm going to make another copy of it. So I'll go down here. I'm going to say duplicate AutoCAD drawing. There's my AutoCAD drawing copy 2. There it is. We'll turn off the original. You see why it's always important to make that duplicate. It just saves you down the road just in case. So there it is. It's all ready to go. I'm going to select everything. We'll turn off that one. Close my layers here. I'm going to Control A to select everything. And then I'll go back in to my Live Paint. I'll go to Object, Live Paint, Make. Now I have my Live Paint. It's time to use my Live Paint bucket. There it is. And I'm going to paint with a color. And I'm going to fill in this view, I'm going to fill in the window panes. And while I'm here, I'm coming down to the next view, and I'm going to fill in these window panes as well. All right, and since I'm still here, we'll change my color. I'll fill in what is supposed to be concrete. In this building. And that's supposed to be concrete in that building. I could take it a step further if I wanted to, and I could fill in the wood areas, which would be the frames around the windows, for example. But I'm not going to do it on the elevation down here because it's going to take me too long to do it. And it's just not relevant enough for what I'm trying to do. So now that I've done and I've created the basic fill regions, I'm going to come up here and click on the Expand button. So just like I did before, I'll click the Expand button. That will allow me to use the Direct Select, the white arrow, and select, we'll say, one of these green regions here. I'll then go to the Select menu, and I'll say Select Same. It's going to be Fill Color. All the green is selected. I'll go to my Layers, and I'm going to create a new layer, and we'll call this Wall-Concrete. Notice I'm always naming the layers. If you end up not naming the layers and it's just Layer 1, Layer 2, Layer 3, when you go back to look at this, you're not going to remember what layers things are on. So it's always helpful to name them. So I'm going to move those green fills onto the wall concrete layer. And now they are. I'll come down to the windows. I'll select the window. I'll go to Select Same Fill Color. There they are. And I'll create a new layer for, let's see, Window Fill. And I'll drag that up onto the Window Fill layer. There we go. And the last piece of this was my wood. I would select the wood, maybe, which was that pink. There it is. I go into Select Same Fill Color. And this was my window frame. And I move it up onto the window frame layer. So now in this example, my lines stayed as part of my AutoCAD. So I don't know why last time they ended up getting deleted, but it's a good illustration of keeping them just in case. So I'll turn the lines off, and I'll turn on first the concrete layer. So there's the concrete, and I would like, in this example, of course, I could still pick my, my pieces, and I could apply a concrete texture to it and have it look that way. Keep it a little bit darker. I could apply that texture. But I'd rather go find an actual photograph and use that as part of the collage. So this is another strategy. It's going to be a compound clipping mask, essentially. And what I'll do is I'll come to good old Creative Commons search. So I'll do search.creativecommons.org. And I'm going to look for a tiling concrete texture. You can create these yourself. I have a tutorial that walks you through how this works. The reason I put tiling concrete texture in is that it should match up side to side as you work through it. So the likelihood of me finding a perfect texture is probably not that high. But I'm going to try to look for something that has just a little bit of texture. Maybe something like this looks okay. Okay, so maybe it's something like that. Let's see if it'll let me download it. Maybe not. This is always the risk when we... nope, that was not the correct link. If I can view it. Yeah, well, clearly it likes to give me ads. OK, so that was a bad choice. I might go back to the Creative Commons search and try searching Flickr. All right, something like that. Oh, that looks reasonable. Okay, sorry it took me a while to find something. Let me go ahead and download that. And I want to go find it and then put it on my flash drive. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'll copy it. For me, in my resources folder, I have some collage folders here. So inside of my collage folder, I have concrete. And this is where I stick a bunch of concrete textures that I collect over time. So I'll stick it in that same folder. Now that it's in the folder, I'll come back to my Illustrator file, and I'm going to pay careful attention to what's happening on the wall concrete layer. So if I expand wall concrete, we see that I have a compound path and then I have a bunch of individual paths. And those represent all of the objects that are in this group, if that makes sense, or in this layer. What I want to do is I want to have that concrete texture apply to all of the objects. And so what I'll do is I need to convert those objects into a compound path before I can apply the texture to them. So let me take all of these objects. I'll select them all. I'm doing both at once, both elevations. I'll select them all, and I'm going to go up to Object, Compound Path, Make. And when I do that, my layer, which used to have a bunch of individual paths on it, now has just one path. And this is really important for doing a clipping mask. If you're going to do it, it has to work like this. So I have the wall first. This is my layer. Then I have compound path. Now I can bring my image in. I'll go to File and then Place. And don't worry, I am going to go through this one more time because I'll do it for the windows too. And I'm going to go find my concrete texture that I just downloaded. So let me come in here. Where was it? Collage, concrete. And there it is. And I'll click Place. OK, it's definitely too big right now. So let's shrink it down. I'll use the free transform tool. I'll shrink it down. The hope is that I can get it to a scale that seems appropriate for the building. Probably a little bit more. Yeah, probably about like that. So it's about the right scale. But obviously this one piece isn't going to cover up my whole building. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to Edit and then Copy and then Edit and then Paste. And I'll slide this one next to the first one, like that. Sometimes it looks like this one's not quite a perfect tiling texture because there's a little bit of a seam there. See that little jump? I also, though, might need to take these and use my Align tools. I've selected both of them. I'm going to align them to the top so that they have the same alignment, and they look reasonable. I'll take the next one, Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, and I'll put it right here. A perfect tiling texture will be seamless when it goes across. You won't be able to tell that there's a seam. This one's not quite perfect, but it'll work for what I'm trying to do. So I've completely covered up that elevation. I'll take these same three. I'm holding down Shift to get all three. I'll copy, Control-C, and then Control-V on the keyboard to cover up that lower elevation. So now I have my wall, I have my compound path, and I have a bunch of images on this layer. Let me rearrange so that the compound path is on top of the images, just so that you can see how it overlaps. So the image is down below. My compound path, my green objects are on top. I'm going to select the main layer, in this case the wall concrete layer. I'll go to the flyout menu right here, and I'll go to make, sorry, I have to see where it is. Ah, there it is, make clipping mask. And when I click that, it's going to cut the concrete texture out in the shape of the green that's on top. And so now if I were to turn back on my original AutoCAD drawing, you could look at my walls like that and see the concrete texture applied to it. So this is something that you definitely couldn't do in AutoCAD, that you can do in Illustrator. Sometimes the photograph itself becomes a little bit too dominant for the drawing. In that case, we could take all of the images here, or in fact the whole layer, and we could go into our opacity and change our transparency value down. So I can make it at like 50% or 70%. Oops. Sorry, I didn't select all of the objects. There we go. Now I've selected them all. And I could change that opacity down to, say, 60 or 70%, lightening it up a little bit. That's going to allow the line drawing to live and be a little bit darker than the texture and not overpower it. I think one of the main mistakes when you do collage work on these kinds of drawings is that you make your colored images too saturated. There's too much of it and not enough of the line drawing. So let me do this whole thing again so that you guys can see it with the windows as a window example. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn off my wall concrete. There it is. I'm going to turn off my AutoCAD drawing. I'm going to turn on my window fill. So there's my window fills. If I look at my window fill layer here, if I expand it, I click the little triangle here to expand it, boy, there's a bunch of paths. And every one of those paths represents one of these individual panes of glass. I need all of those to come together. This is kind of like, remember when we did the frames in InDesign and we made the compound path out of the frames to make it span across all the frames? Remember that when we had the different rectangles? This is the same concept. So I'm going to take all of these objects and I'm going to make a compound path out of them. So I'll select them all, and I happen to be doing both elevations at once. I could just do one elevation and then do the other elevation, but I'd have to have separate layers over here. So I'll select them all. I'll go up to Object. I'll come down to Compound Path, and I'll go to Make. All of those individual paths become one path. So I have my window fill layer, and I have a compound path layer. That's it. If you have more than one path, this whole process won't work. So you really have to make sure that they come together. So there they are. They've come together. Now it's time to bring in that image. This time I'm going to bring in an image of sky. So I'd go back to my Google search or my Flickr search, and I'd look for sky. I already have some sky images, so you don't have to watch me try to find them. So I'll come back to Illustrator. I'll go to File and then Place. There's my skies. I'm going to go into a cloudy sky. And I'm going to pick maybe that one. And I'll go ahead and place it. Turns out significantly too large. So let's go ahead and make that a little bit smaller. I'll go to my free transform tool right here. I'll shrink this down like that. If you want to see your windows in front, remember I can change and put the compound path on top of the image. Now I can see it a little bit better. There it is. Going to make sure that I get those clouds in there. It may take 2 images, one for each, so I'll press Control C and then Control V, and I can drop that one in for those windows, maybe like that, making sure it's high enough so that it doesn't interfere there. And again, making sure the compound path is on top of both images. So it doesn't matter how many images you have, but it does matter how many paths you have. You have to have only one path. So I have my main layer, I have a compound path, and I have 2 images in this sense. I'll select the main layer itself, go up to the flyout menu, and choose Make Clipping Mask. And I will then cut out all of my windows to have the clouds in the background. In this example, I could turn back on my AutoCAD drawing, and we see that my glass is filled in with a reflection of sky, which can be a good strategy. In this particular case, the sky is a little bit too strong, so I'll select all of these window fills, and I'll go into my opacity layer here, and I'm going to turn off or turn down maybe to like 40% the sky. So it's there, but it's not overpowering. And I think that's one of the important things to keep in mind. So I could turn back on my concrete. So there's my concrete wall. Now my windows are filled in, my concrete's filled in. So you can see these elevations are kind of living. Let me turn, for your purposes, let me turn the both of these up a little bit, because on the projector you can't see them. Oops. I'm just trying to make it dark enough so that you guys can see it on the projector. So now that gives me a little bit more texture for my building. It makes my elevations live with some texture on them. This can be another strategy. So when we do our post-processing, it could be as simple as what I did to the floor plan, where I just filled in some select regions. Let me turn those guys back on. As if I took out some colored markers and I colored it in a little bit. Or we could add some kind of a texture behind the buildings. Remember to keep it light. Don't make it too overpowering. And so that can then make the elevations kind of stand out a bit. At this point, it's time to bring in other information like text or title blocks or other graphics. I have some stuff prepared for you. You could, of course, draw it by hand yourself. At the bottom of today's exercise, which is 122, if I came down here, there is download a zip with sample title block, graphic bar scale, and annotations. I'm going to let that download. A couple other things that I want to point out, though. Under Part 4, Text and Annotations here, when you're doing your text and or your annotations, choosing the font is obviously important, and deciding what font is appropriate is important. We as architects, there's a certain part of you that wants to have perfect lettering, like architect handwriting. And it's the nature of all of us to want that. My guess is that nobody in this room can do it perfectly. It's really, really hard. When I was in undergrad at Berkeley, there was a girl in studio with me, and I feel bad. I don't even remember what her name was now. But she could letter by hand better than a font. She was a machine when it came to architectural lettering. She was so good at it, it was creepy. And she could just sit there and write. And it wasn't like, you guys are in 130 and you have to do the lettering practice and it's like a chore and you hate it and it takes forever and you just practice those letters and it's awful. She could do it like she was just writing a couple notes to her friends. It would just come out of her. It was so cool. Anyway, I can't do it. despite all my years of practice. Furthermore, there's no real good options on a computer that represent this kind of font. So I have found one that I really like. It's called Frank the Architect. It was written or was created by a font designer. I have a link to it here that you can see it. He very generously has donated a free version for us to use. It doesn't have bold or italics or any of the fancy stuff. And he kind of walks through how he created it and why he created it. It works really, really nice as an architectural font. It's a really good one. So I would encourage you to download it and be able to use it. Use the free version. If you feel like you like it, support the guy. I think it costs $20 to get the full version of it. But it's something I use all the time in my drawings. So it's definitely something to be aware of, and I wanted to point that out to you guys as well. So the links are there. Like I said, there's a free version which you can download and install. We talked about how to install a font temporarily on the school computers, and if you don't remember, you can go into the tutorials, and I have a walkthrough on how to do that. So I've downloaded the title blocks and the scales. Let me go ahead and show that, and I'll right-click and extract it, and I'm going to put it into my resources folder, and I'll put it into the Illustrator folder. And I happen to already have it, but I would put it into the title blocks folder. I'll go ahead and just drop it here for right now. There we go. And so inside of the title blocks, I have title blocks. It's right here, title blocks and scales. This was the new one. And so I have a couple different things that are available for you to use, and I'll walk through it. I have a drawing note, which is just like a little leader with some text, and I'll bring that one in a second. I have two drawing scale. When I say 1-4, that's quarter scale. 1-8 would be eighth scale. This is a casual scale, and I have a more formal scale, I think. No, I don't think I gave it to you. Anyway, I'm going to bring these in. So they're all extracted on my flash drive. Let me go back to Illustrator here, and I'll go to File and then Place. Let me go into title blocks. Here we go. Illustrator. There we go. I'm going to start with my quarter scale. This represents the scale of the drawing. So it's called a graphic bar scale. It's looking for Frank the Architect because I created it, which I don't have. And so here, oops, let me get it out of that layer. Actually, let me create a new layer altogether at the very top. And we'll call this title block. And so in this example, let me zoom in here a little bit. There's that graphic bar scale that tells me that this is 1/4 inch equals a foot. You guys have seen these before, right? So I can drop that in. That gives me a little bit of a sense of scale. Maybe it belongs here. Maybe it belongs somewhere else. I can also bring in a title block. Let me go to File and then Place. And I could come down here, and I have a title block. That's my overall title block, drawing scale, drawing title. Let me do this one. Let me place it. I'll say OK. Oops, once again, it's on the wrong layer. There it is. Let me zoom out a little bit. There's a drawing title. You notice that it says title text goes here, and this is some kind of subtext if you wanted to put that in. Think about where it lines up on your drawing. So maybe it belongs lining up right about there. You can double click on it to get into it, and then you can double click, and eventually there we go. I could say this is my, I don't even know which elevation this is. This is my east elevation, I think. So I can say east elevation. I could even write in the scale down here, 1/4 inch equals 1 foot, for example. Let me change that to be right justified so it's at the end. And then we move that down here. And when I'm done inside of the group, I'll jump myself back out. And there it is. So I can do it like that, where I have this little title block. If you don't like mine, draw your own. There's nothing wrong with drawing your own and bringing your own in. These are just some examples. I could also bring in the overall title block. This is based on the size. We're doing a 24 by 36, so I bring in the 24 by 36. I'll say OK. And let me zoom out, Control minus. It's on this layer. It's covering up everything right now. So I have two options. I can take this and I can change the blending mode to be in multiply, which is going to show through. Or I could make it a layer that's below the other layers. Either way. Same thing as Photoshop, blending mode. White, on a multiply blending mode, white becomes transparent. We already went through that. Okay? So once again, it's in the transparency. This is when everything starts to mend together. I'm sorry I'm throwing stuff at you right now. So I can switch to multiply. It becomes transparent. This title block then, if I were to zoom in the lower right corner, this is a very simple one. Right? I have drawing title, client name, client address, sheet numbers, etc. I can put those on. It's very simple. Let's see. What else? I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make with these kinds of drawings is they come in to do their titles, and they come in and they say, oh, this is the north elevation. So I'm going to write north elevation. I can't type this morning, sorry. And they take the text and they say, oh man, that's really small. Sweet. Now I can see that it's north elevation. Okay, this happens all the time. And I promise you right now, I'll warn you that if you do this on what you hand me, you will get graded down for it. So this is fair warning. Okay? This happens so frequently in student work that goes up on the wall. I bet if I walked back there at the work that's hanging on the wall, this has happened on at least one of them. You'll see this happen on studios, etc. When you're looking at it on a computer, the fonts look small. If you look here, that East Elevation font looks really small, right? When it prints out, though, I think this is at 12 point. You guys all read essays at 12 point, or less, or more if you want to gain some extra space for your English class. But that's a reasonable font for you to read. 60 point, which is what I just made this, or 48 point, is huge. And so when you print it out, it's going to look huge. And when you squint at this drawing right now, just squint at it up on there, what leaps out at you? That text. It's bold, it's bigger, it's thicker than anything else on the drawing, and that's what you focus on. That's a big mistake. You want to make sure that people are focusing on the drawing, not the giant text. In some rare instances, you can end up doing giant text and it will work. And I'll show you this one as an illustration. And it works if I were to do something like this. Oops, hold on a second. Sorry, I'm accidentally selecting my title block in the back, so let me lock that so I'm not selecting it anymore. There we go, and this needs to be something like this can work. Where you've drawn your elevation, you have the ground. Now it's a little faint for the projector. It's right on my computer. Let me darken it up so you guys can see it a little bit better on the projector. Yeah, something like that, where the text is part of the drawing. So if I were to squint at this, I see north elevation there, but it's not as overpowering as that big black bold text. So you can get away with it with something like this. If you have a section or whatever, you can hide large text in it, and it can become part of the drawing. In that case, it's probably OK. It just has to be done in a very tasteful manner. And text is usually the kind of thing that comes at the last second because you ran out of time. And that's where the giant north elevation label comes from. So it's almost better not to have giant text labels and to have nothing than to have the giant text label. Okay, so just like take that out of your vocabulary. If you don't take anything else from this class, maybe take that. All right? So today, you're going to do some collage work. Keep the colors rather muted, not too strong. Keep the text small and controlled. Think carefully about what font you're choosing and what font is appropriate for your drawing. And you're going to get this out into a 24 by 36 sheet that you're ready to plot. As part of your assignment 105, remember you do actually have to plot this particular sheet. So first thing that I would do is I would save this as a PDF. And so I'd go to File and I'd go to Save. I don't have to do a Save As. It already is a PDF. That's the great thing about Illustrator. So nothing changed. Once I've saved this drawing, I'm going to go open it in Acrobat. In some rare cases, the files balloon in size and they won't end up wanting to plot, in which case you come to me and we'll sort it out. But for most of you, this shouldn't be a problem. So I've gone ahead and I've saved it.